Just let it in.
A 9-Proof Media production.
I will fulfill our destiny.
You are listening to the Cantina Cast,
Never heard of it.
the home of thought-provoking Star Wars discussion.
Well, if droids could think, there'd be none of us here, would there?
Here are your hosts, Emperor Rondo
You must break through the fog of lies the Jedi have created around you.
and Lord Joa.
You will join us or die here, Master.
Everybody, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. I am your host, Mike, and of course I am joined by Joa. Joa, say hello to the fine folks.
Hello there.
But that's not who. We got a lot of people joining us here, Joe. Well, not a lot, just one person, actually, a very special person. We are joined by the man behind the Star Wars ring theory, Mike Klimo. Mike, say hello to everybody.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to actually finally get you on here. Now, we originally wanted you to come on a while back, but unfortunately, the way things were going, I guess Joa creatively thought you were on a lot of podcasts. And he's like, well, if he's on this show, everyone's going to think we'll do it just repeating things. But anyway, we're glad you're here because, things are getting very interesting as we go into December here. So quickly, I just want to, how did you even come up with this whole ring theory first? And the other question I have is for our audience who doesn't know about the ring theory, how did it come about? I guess I'm trying to say here. So take it away, Mike.
So, I mean, originally I was actually starting. I wanted to write a kind of a series of articles on the prequels, and cover a lot of the myths and misconceptions about a lot of things. Whether George Lucas really intended the movies to be aimed at kids. Whether that was just a kind of a deflection that he came up with, when criticisms hit with the prequels, and things like the acting and the dialogue, and so I kind of had a whole series of those planned, and as I was doing research for those and scrubbing through the films and taking screenshots, I had noticed some of the parallels that existed in the movies before, but I started to notice some other things, and so I kind of broke down the movies, using my filmmaking background and screenwriting background, and I kind of broke down the scripts a little bit. I started with The Phantom Menace, and what I've kind of said in the past is that I think when we were watching those movies for the first time, I think we all realized how much The Phantom Menace kind of felt a lot like A New Hope. But I think some of us kind of picked up on some of the parallels that The Phantom Menace had with The Return of the Jedi, particularly with the end and the multi-strand battle. And as I was kind of breaking down the scripts, and I noticed that the beginnings kind of lined up too, and then the middle kind of lined up, and then so I thought, well, that's really interesting. I mean, that's I never would have expected that to happen. And then I kind of went through each film like that, and you saw kind of a pattern take shape, that ABC CBA rhyme scheme that I've talked about, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and so I did some more research on like storytelling techniques, and I had remembered chiasmus, that kind of rhetorical device from when I was back in college and studying comparative religion, and that led me to a book by a social anthropologist named Mary Douglas, and it was a book called Thinking in Circles, and she actually spoke about this ancient literary device called ring composition. And as I was reading through this, and then suddenly it became quite apparent that this was most likely what George Lucas most likely how he designed at least the structure of the prequels to align with the original movies. And once I was reading her book, and it just, the light bulb goes off, and suddenly everything becomes, everything became very clear, but at the same time, it's like I was watching the movies for the first time, and really kind of seeing this other, this universal structure that I think Lucas used to fashion this, this circle or ring out of all 6 movies. So it was kind of a long. I mean, it was a long journey, and it wasn't just like everything didn't happen overnight. It was, once I once I started seeing those parallels, between the Phantom Menace and Return of the Jedi, I kind of shelved, those other essays and thought, this could be something interesting, and let's just see where the evidence takes me.
Mike, I just want to jump in real quick.
Oh, sure.
In the beginning of your essay on your website there, you had there's a quote by George Lucas that says it's an interesting thing about Star Wars, and he goes, I didn't even really push it this very far. You know what I mean? Because he says it wasn't really that important, but then yet you got this complex theory that's going about. I mean, did he really take this serious? I guess this is my question. It was this based off of that quote or what he said there. Do you think he was actually? Do you think he wanted to do more, or did he dumb it down? I hate to even use that word, or dumb it down for the audience, such as me and Joa, to figure things out and to make those connections, or am I looking at that quote wrong? Am I misquoting or looking at it wrong, sir?
I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it's amazing how much he talks about the films and how much he doesn't talk about the films. And for many, many years, and we've talked about the Joseph Campbell influence, but yet he doesn't really talk a whole lot about it. Or all the cinematic influences that we see in the movies, but again, he doesn't really go into a whole lot of specifics. And on the one hand, I think of an artist who doesn't really like to talk too much about their own work and really go into the meanings and the kind of the deeper stuff. But at the same time, I think he just wanted to make people understand at that point that there's a whole lot going on underneath the surface, and there's a lot of depth to those movies that that a lot of people, they don't realize, or maybe they just don't care about. And I think since 1977, it just really hasn't been appreciated. I mean, that was one of the reasons I wanted to write the essay, because a lot of people don't realize. But I mean, outside the so-called geek community, I mean, the film have never really been taken very seriously critically, and they've kind of been looked at as just kind of silly, kids movies with terrible acting and terrible dialogue, and that's been that way since the beginning. So I think it was with that quote, maybe his way of saying, look, there's a whole lot in those movies that you may not have thought about before, and maybe we should. Obviously some people maybe read too much, people maybe read enough into it, but I usually go, into the latter camp. I don't think look ideal. Sorry, I just have a tendency to ramble, so stop anytime.
Oh no! You can talk
Hello?
all night. That's fine. Go ahead. No, you can talk all night if you want. That's fine. That's what we got you here for. Joe, did you have a question?
Yeah. What you said earlier that this all didn't happen for you overnight to kind of get to the point where the essay, and it started as one thing and then kind of became all of this other thing. I notice, you're on you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on social media a lot, and you're pointing things out. You're constantly still doing this, defending the prequels and doing it through social media. So, and you keep posting. I don't know if it's new to you or it's just new things you're finding all the time. You're like, here, look at this picture compared to this picture. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this essay is still really an ongoing project.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that amazed me. As I think, going back, I think a lot of us picked up on that let's say the one rhyme scheme with the 6 movies, the kind of ABC, and I think for the most part, a lot of us, I don't know how much attention we really gave it, but as I was then writing this essay and kind of figuring out this other rhyme scheme going on, and putting that together, I mean, I think I even mentioned it in the essay. It's like, I spent an awful lot of time trying to, connect the dots and find a lot of those parallels, but I know I mean, I knew at the time that I certainly wasn't finding all of them, and I couldn't wait to get it out there to see what other parallels fans could find, not just, you know, I guess in both rhyme schemes, and I think that's definitely come to pass. I mean, I'm finding new things every day, and people are sending new things to me, and they're posting them themselves, and they're even looking at, The Force Awakens, and they're finding parallels, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that ultimately, I think, is something that's extremely unique to the storytelling in Star Wars. I think it's deliberate, and I think there's countless examples, and but it's definitely an ongoing project. Yeah, I mean.
Well, Mike, I was just going to say, I don't mean to interrupt you there, but I remember,
Sure.
I remember I was on the Prequel Strikes Back, and I was doing my interview, and of course they asked me name some parallels, like scenes and everything. Of course, I was drawing a blank at the time, so I feel really bad. But in any case, I remember saying to them, I go, I don't know, it just seemed I'm surprised no one ever thought of this beforehand. I'm sure maybe people mumble, but when I was younger, in 1999, when I first saw the original. The Phantom Menace, and I'm watching it, and you see these scenes that are happening, like you said, the opening scene. Well, it mirrors Return of the Jedi. You kind of can see it. It's the same, but it's different. Like, it's just a slightly different when you think about it. But I remember like seeing in the pod race, when Anakin goes up in the air and then he comes down on top of Saboba. That reminded me of Leia in Return of the Jedi when she'd come down and attack the biker scout and stuff like that. And then even at the end, of course, it was like, oh yeah, obviously, but. I took it as homages to the original, obviously, but I always knew Star Wars it had deeper meaning and themes, but I didn't see it as a poetic thing here. I didn't see it as anything like that. So do you run into a lot of that, like people that are looking at it like I was looking at, just like homages, and then come up to you and say, well, I think it's just a homage to the old movies? Do you run into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things to me about Star Wars is how it certainly works on a lot of different levels. And on the surface, it's this fantastic, action-packed adventure that's a total throwback, to the serials of the 30s and 40s. And personally, if you didn't even go beyond that, I still think those movies are just fantastic. But to me, what makes them very special is the time and attention and the care that has been put into them in fashioning this kind of modern myth. And I think that's why we're still talking about these movies, whether you love them or hate them. I mean, we're still talking about them decades afterwards. I think that's a real testament to the genius of George Lucas and all of the people that he worked with, and how much has been put into those movies. Yes, I do hear from a lot of people who just saw them. I think we all did. I did too. When I watched The Phantom Menace, I saw those as callbacks. I saw those as references, to an older, to one of the original films. But when I took a closer look, that's what was fascinating to me, is how there is kind of a larger pattern going on. There is a real rhyme and reason to the parallels. It wasn't just, they weren't just kind of thrown in there haphazardly. I think they were extremely deliberate. So now when I watch the pictures, I kind of see that that overarching structure in play, and I think it's just truly fascinating.
Well, and Mike, I'll jump in here and I'll say, we're talking about these things, and we're all kind of being kind of vague, but I mean, so I'm going to steal from your essay here, and we'll go right into the Phantom Menace and Return of the Jedi for people who haven't gone to your website there and seen it at StarWarsRingTheory.com. And I just took a little screen capture, and it's in here in our notes tonight. And I've got the Phantom Menace, Act 1, 2, 3, and then below it's Return of the Jedi, Acts 1, 2, and 3. And you have it written here, Act 1 in Phantom Menace, 2 Jedi embark on a mission to rescue Queen Amidala from Theed Palace. Return of the Jedi's Act 1, 2 droids embark on a mission to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt's palace. So, I mean, you can definitely see a lot of similarity just in that. 2 different people. I mean, and then you go to Act 2, and you have a lot more depth to this one. On the planet of Tatooine, a native Anakin Skywalker befriends the Jedi and helps them fix their ship. On the contrary, in Return of the Jedi, on the planet Endor, the native Ewoks befriend the rebels and take them to the shield generator. So, this is like kind of, the natives helping out the visitors, and so these are the kind of examples you're talking about.
Right. So, with the essay, I tried to, and that's one of the reasons why it took so long is to try to first make sense of it and then try to simplify it in a way that we can kind of go through it step by step so people can understand this. So basically what I'm saying is that there's, like I said, there's a rhyme scheme I think we all picked up on when we watched the pictures. We thought A New Hope matched with Phantom Menace, we thought Empire matched with Clones, and we thought Return of the Jedi matches with Revenge of the Sith. And the amazing thing is that's true. That's accurate. That actually is, I think, a very deliberate decision that Lucas made. It was done to parallel the journeys of Luke and Anakin, and they essentially go through the same things. They make slightly different choices and end in different places. But while that is happening, there is a second rhyme scheme going on that unifies all 6 pictures in a way that really has never been done before in cinema history. And that's this other rhyme scheme, ABC, CBA, where Phantom Menace more closely aligns with Return of the Jedi. Clones and Empire still line up, but in a very different way than you may have ever realized. And then Sith matches up with A New Hope. And the way that these work, like what you just mentioned, Menace and Jedi, you can kind of break it down into each act. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And events that you might remember in Jedi, like you just mentioned, 2 Jedi embark on a mission to rescue Queen Amidala from Theed Palace. They get twisted in a way where they're repeated in the Phantom Menace, but with variation. So now instead of 2 Jedi, we have 2 droids, and they're embarking on a mission to rescue, another character from another palace. And Lucas, again, was very deliberate in this, and he talked a lot about it, but not in the terms of this ring composition idea. He would usually talk about it in musical terms, playing the same song but using different instruments and changing the arrangement. And he also used a term that I really like called visual jazz, which is just that idea of kind of taking the same idea but interpreting it in a different way. And I know this sounds very out there. I know this definitely doesn't sound like your run-of-the-mill Hollywood blockbuster that you're used to, but I think a lot of us forget where Lucas came from, and he's always been a very experimental filmmaker, and he's always been more interested in these kind of abstract, kind of avant-garde ideas. And Star Wars has always been that way, but this to me just really pushed it to a level that I think we're just starting to learn about and appreciate. And so yeah, that's kind of a.
Well, that was one of my questions. This is the question and it came up when I was doing my documentary scene there with the Bradley and the guys, and it came up. And did we think that George Lucas meant to do this? The way you're talking tonight, Mike, and I mean, you believe that in some form or fashion, whether he was looking up ring composition or something, but all of these things, at least most of them, you believe that these were intentional things. Like even the one the specific example we've talked about, the Jedi embarking, and then the beginning of Return of Jedi. It's 2 Jedi, and then you've got the Empire on the other side, and Jedi when they're in the ship in space, and literally even the cinematography is flipped. It's good and evil, and they're like mirrored on the other side of each other, which I think is it's one of the very first examples you make in your essay, and I think it's one of the most compelling as well. So I mean, it's not just the story essence of it; it's literally these cinematography, these visual cues that he's giving you, and sometimes I think we overblow this whole CGI and practical effects, and what does it matter? It's all. But you have to remember, even the visuals, the cinematography, it's an art form all in itself, and I think that sometimes we you get so caught up in graphics, and you almost overlook graphics because it's eye candy, right?
Right.
But it's still. So I think what we have to remember is come back and look. It's still an artistry. It's still an art form. It takes very talented people to accomplish any of this stuff. And right there, just in the cinematography, he's got it's a mirror image both in the story with the good and evil on each side, and the ships are just like displayed on opposite sides of each other as we're introed into both movies.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, well said. And that's a really important point too. I mean, there are a couple of things. One, Lucas has all, and I know this is going to just sound pretentious as hell, but Lucas has always kind of considered himself more of a like a silent filmmaker, and he compares Star Wars movies to silent movies, and they were created in a way that where he's telling the story through the visuals with musical accompaniment. The acting is there, the dialogue is there, but that's just not where the emphasis is being placed. And I know that's a tough idea to grasp, especially for all of us who love to go to the multiplexes and watch the latest Hollywood blockbuster. It's a tough thing to kind of wrap your mind around. But the other thing is that you're right, where it's not just the story. So what I started doing was breaking down each film into its acts, and you can break them down into sequences and scenes, down to the blocking of the actors in the scene, to the cinematography, the compositions, the dialogue, the lighting, the movement of the characters. All of these details play into this larger schematic of creating this kind of mirror image between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, and it's really astounding. I mean, and I think that's kind of what he means. When Lucas says things like, in my films, the dialogue is not where the movie is, and this is one of the things that he's talking about, where, like you mentioned, one of the first things you see, in the Phantom Menace after the title crawl is that Republic cruiser coming in, and in a almost mirror image, it's going through a sequence that's similar to what's happening in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when the shuttle comes out of the Star Destroyer and goes into the Death Star, and that's communicating all kinds of ideas about the Republic being considered good and the Empire being considered bad, and the ships that they're going into, and not only that, but the contrast in these giant planets that are in the background from this green life, this kind of life-giving planet of Naboo, and then you have this kind of skull-like Death Star 2 looming in the background, and so when you put those two, when you juxtapose those two images, I mean, that's the story that's being told here, versus just a line of dialogue.
Well, it's always been said that George's best work is when he has no dialogue. Like, it's always been, like those scenes that you see Luke looking off into the sunset, and then, like Padme and Anakin looking across when, the Republic's about to fall and he's about to fall and stuff like that. So a lot of his best scenes are with no dialogue at all. It's with the music, with John Williams, of course,
Sure.
which always plays heavy into all of this. But my other question to you, Mike, is have you come across I hate even using the term, but like a prequel hater that saw the movies like they used, and then come to you after and say, wow, now that I see it the way you see it, or the way you presented your ring theory here, I see it a whole different way, and I actually kind of like the prequels. Have you run into that at all?
Believe it or not, yeah. I mean,
I figured you had to.
Yeah, I get
At least one.
a lot of people who they usually fall into a couple of camps. I mean, they fans of the prequels that now enjoy them even more, and they've kind of discovered things that, like me, had discovered things that you just never had thought about before or had noticed before. Then there are prequel haters who still dislike the pictures, but maybe not as much, and they've come to at least respect, I think, the vision of Lucas and what he was trying to accomplish. However, they may not think that he fully accomplished it. And then there are prequel haters who they don't believe it. they don't think it's they don't think it's very accurate. They think it's just trying to find patterns and meaningless noise. And but at the same time, they'll say, and even if it were true, then it doesn't make any difference because you still have 3 movies with terrible acting, terrible dialogue, terrible writing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
is that the people from Red Letter? That's still... I'm just wondering if they ever responded to your theory at all. Have they ever done that at all? Have they ever acknowledged it or even?
No. I know that it. I know that it's shown up on, I think, the Red Letter Media Reddit. I think they have their own Reddit forum, perhaps. I think it's kind of showed up on there, and their fans have just taken it to town. But I've never talked to Mike Stoklasa. I think that's his name. But I'd love to. I mean, I'd love to sit down and talk with him about the films. I'm more than willing, and I'd love to have that conversation.
Well, we can mediate it if you want. We'll be happy. We'd be happy to do that. But I was just curious. Yeah, exactly. Pay-per-view. We'll have it. We'll do that type of thing. But I was just curious if
UFC
anyone.
194.
Yeah. No, not at all. But in any case, Joe, did you have another question, sir? I didn't know if you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah. Well, speaking of since we're kind of on that subject, and you bring it up in the essay again, and that's where I'm pulling all my notes from tonight, Mike. So, you mentioned Rod Hilton's machete order, and a lot of people, I see this coming up. I've never watched the movies this way, and I'm willing to give it a chance just to do something different, but he's saying and I wouldn't do this part of it, but to skip episode 1 completely. My question to you is I know this might be a little bit off the topic of ring theory, but not really. I mean, it's in the realm of the prequels and everything, which is really what all this is really about. Why isn't episode 1 skippable? Like, give us your argument.
Oh, we can talk about whatever you want. We can talk about prequel haters and Machete Order and Simon Pegg all night. I'm whatever you guys.
We don't talk about Simon Pegg. We don't give him the light of day on this show.
Yeah.
So
actually, I'd rather talk about Red Letter Media than Simon Pegg, but that's a whole other thing. But go ahead, Mike. I don't mean to interrupt.
I take it back. I apologize.
So why isn't episode 1 skippable? Like, in your opinion? I mean, we agree with you, but what's your opinion?
Oh, sure. Well, my first thought about Machete Order is, personally, I don't care how you watch the movies. I don't care in what order you watch them. If you watch them standing on your head, I don't care. But removing one of the pictures to me is a deal breaker. And I go into this in the essay, particularly with the Phantom Menace, and how I believe the intent was to really fashion it as a prologue and as kind of the introductory section of this ring composition. And it lays out a lot of very important information, I think character information, and I think thematic information that we'll come back to at the close of the ring. I really think it's kind of an indispensable part, and I don't see how you can take that out and still have that kind of the full experience to me of the the idea of the birth and the rise and fall and ultimate redemption of Anakin Skywalker. I think if you're looking at the pictures from that point of view, I don't see how you take that out.
Well, and without the prequels at all, I mean, there is no necessarily there's no need that we feel like there needs to be a redemption of Darth Vader. We just want, if you're just watching just the original trilogy, you just want Luke to to help his dad out. Like, that's the real reason behind that. I mean, is it not like there's no real, we're not talking about prophecies and fulfilling your destiny and Darth Vader being redeemed, because in a lot of ways that was Luke Skywalker's story until the prequels came out, and then it almost makes the original trilogy more of Darth Vader's story. It almost makes the saga that we've seen to this point more of his story. So without the prequels, I feel like Darth Vader thematically is a lot less significant. Not that he's not awesome. If we just had just those 3 movies and the prequels were never made, Darth Vader is still awesome. So I don't want anybody out there to misrepresent what I'm saying or misunderstand what I'm saying. It's just that thematically Vader is not as significant in my opinion. And then as far as episode 1 goes, just the sheer everything Palpatine did, just for Palpatine alone, like you can't skip the movie in my opinion, just because of all the little intricacies that will, as you say, come to a close later throughout the rest of the movies, where it slowly builds, and then maybe not so much even ring theory what I'm talking about, but just significance to the story. Like I think it's just, oh, that's why he did that, and okay, now it makes sense. He was just moving pawns in episode 1, but it got him where he wanted to go.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, if you want to just enjoy the movies, that's fine, and that's great too. But if you ultimately want to understand, the significance of these characters, and particularly Anakin Skywalker's story, if you want to derive, the meaning from those pictures that Lucas most likely put in them, you can't do that without that initial chapter. I mean, you can't, it's the ultimate setup. It's the ultimate setup that leads to, the ultimate payoff. In episode 6, and I talk about that a lot in the essay, particularly with the themes that are laid out, in some cases very explicitly, with balance and the idea of greed and the idea of symbiosis, and all of these things that you might not be thinking about, or you might not understand how those are kind of weaved into the other episodes and how they're dealt with. But I think you're right too. It adds a lot of weight to the story of Anakin and Darth Vader, and a lot of people forget how the prequels really they recontextualized the original movies. You're right. I mean, most of us growing up thought that it was really kind of the story of Luke Skywalker and his hero's journey, and that is true. But the larger 6-film arc now becomes the hero's journey of Anakin Skywalker, and that, I think, is really significant.
Well, Mike, I was just going to say, now the prequel haters that we run into, isn't it more like, they hold up the original trilogy to such high esteem, and they should. It's good. I mean, but it has its flaws, and I don't mean flaws in a bad way. I mean, like, when I was growing up, I didn't really care for Obi-Wan. Like, I thought he was, all right, he's just the old wise wizard, and he wasn't around that long. And then when you see the prequels, he's got more depth to the character. And we could, as we discussed, Joe, on the Darth Vader dissection we had, and we were talking about Vader, we're like, he's not really that. I mean, yeah, he's menacing, and he's just the bad guy that's hunting down the rebels and Luke and everything else and stuff like that. But he didn't get more he got interesting as he went on. And now, as we saw with the 9-year-old boy, then the punky emo teenage boy, and all that stuff going on and going forward, there was more depth to him. I mean, do you think that? Now, let me ask you this. Now, I'm not sure if you're a fan of the Clone Wars or anything like that. Does that play into the? I don't know if you've dove into that realm of ring theory at all. At how that would play into this in any way, shape, or form. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, believe it or not, I haven't watched too many episodes of the Clone Wars.
Fair enough. You sound like Joe. That's okay.
What was amazing, though, is when I started talking to more fans after I wrote this, and they told me that I needed to watch, at least the Mortis arc, and I think it was the Lost Missions. There was a 3-episode arc with Yoda.
Yes, correct. Yep.
And that it just kind of blew me away, because I think that really validated at least a lot of the essay and what I think Lucas was trying to communicate, particularly about the Force, the living Force, the cosmic Force, and how how those two kind of interact with each other. But I don't know. What was the other part of your question again? I'm sorry.
I was just wondering how it would fit actually into your ring theory. I mean, would it even because I was going to actually tie this into the Force Awakens as we go forward here with the spin-offs and stuff. But this, I guess, what first question I should ask you is how the things that we've seen so far of the Force Awakens. It seems like you're getting excited because I've seen you on Facebook and Twitter. You posted a few things, and then we had the exchange the other day with the TIE fighters in the sunset or
Right.
sunrise or however you want to put it. And, you said no, that's more of this and stuff. And I agree with you, but I think a lot of people were getting maybe a little too excited. What have you seen so far that kind of makes you feel at least relieved? I think I'd have to say you feel relieved going forward that it's going to continue, so to speak, because that was one of my worries. Now that George's element is kind of not there anymore. Sure, it's going to be a great movie and JJ's talented and all that other stuff, but the spirit of George, I felt like it's going to be missing. And then, when I read your ring theory, you get into it, we do our dissections and stuff, I felt like a little bit of what made that is going to be gone. So do you feel comfortable going forward based on what you've seen so far?
Yes and no. I guess I should probably say, and this is, I should have done a better job, in the essay to make this clearer, and it probably didn't become more clear until after the fact. But, this idea of the ABC rhyme scheme, isn't necessarily ring composition. That's kind of the ring composition is just the ABC CBA. But like I said, at the same time, you have this other rhyme scheme going on, and I think that was purposefully done because then ultimately you have two trilogies. One is the fall, one is the redemption. One signifies dark, one signifies light, and they both exist within this larger circle, this ring composition. And that is, that kind of yin-yang idea that I go into in the essay. And I think, again, that was absolutely, I think, what Lucas was trying to do. So when I see The Force Awakens, I haven't read too many spoilers. Some, mostly just because I can't avoid all of them when I'm online, and that's fine. And from what I've seen and from what I've read, it certainly sounds like The Force Awakens will follow the same template, and I don't mean that in a bad way, as A New Hope and The Phantom Menace. I think we're going to see a lot of that same visual jazz. Again, those same ideas, but just reinterpreted a different way. I'll keep this very vague, where we see two characters in the beginning who embark on this kind of mission together, and they go down to a planet, and I'm getting the sense, like in A New Hope, there will be a strong MacGuffin, like the Death Star plans, but in this case, it's a lightsaber, and it will probably end up inside of a droid, and so on and so forth. That, I think, is becoming more and more clear as I see, more TV spots and trailers.
I think there's some running as we're talking, but anyway.
Right.
Continue, Mike. I'm sorry.
But outside of that rhyme scheme, I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be anything else going on. I think the ring composition. I think that works like a closed loop. I think that was Lucas's intention. The circle represents the hero's journey. It represents Anakin's life, death. So I don't know if there's another rhyme scheme going on. I've had some ideas. When I see that, in The Force Awakens, it looks like we're going to a desert planet, as well as a snow planet, as well as a forest planet. So then I have ideas about, well, are we kind of going through all three movies, in the original trilogy, or is there something else going on? And
right,
I just don't know, and I can't wait to find out. So.
It's funny because me and Mike, we probably seen or read, and who knows how official or none of it's official, but who knows how accurate any of it really is. We probably have seen a couple more things than you, just based on your own description of what you've seen, and try to avoid it as best you can. That's what we kind of say is, like, it seems like this, even in the story, what we know of it, it almost feels like they're shoving A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back like all into the same movie. And now that you mentioned that, the visual, the environments, you do have those three different environments, and usually you have. I think Revenge of the Sith was kind of an anomaly because of just the way that movie was, but usually there's, you only see about three, different planets or environments. In The New Hope, you get Tatooine, the Death Star, and then Yavin, and even Yavin's in, kind of short order there. In the Empire, you get Hoth, you get Dagobah, you get Bespin. And so it's always kind of like three. These three seem to be, important kind of numbers in some of the movies. So, and then now it looks like we're going to get another 3. We'll get Jakku and whatever the other 2 planets end up being named. So, there's always those numbers, and even going off into another franchise, which I go off into, for example, sometimes is like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. She always talks about like numbers and stuff, and like even in her story, the 7 is a magically, it's a number that's magical or something. So I mean, so there's something with numbers that even just the number of things you're seeing, it lines up with what you're seeing. And I know it's a horrible example, but you get what I'm saying. It's just
absolutely.
It's just numbers have a significance because it's, whether it's on a human level, like we can understand it, like 3 seems more symmetric than 4, even though it's an odd number. Like, I don't know why that is, but 3 seems to be a nice round number, even though it's not a round number, right? So anyway, I know there's a lot of rambling there, but just throwing some ideas out there.
No, absolutely. And I will say again, without going into spoilers for your listeners, I'm also noticing things that remind me a lot of The Empire Strikes Back. And I mean, like, from what I've heard about the opening to the center, the midpoint of the picture to maybe what's happening towards the end, and you start to wonder. That I don't know about, but I will say, I get the sense that, at the very least, if what Lucas is saying is true and they're not using his stories and his treatments, and they kind of went their own direction, it sounds to me like a larger schematic, must still be in play, of Lucas's, because there's no way that Kasdan and Abrams are going to come in and follow these story beats, the way that they are, unless someone in the story group or Lucasfilm, whomever, is saying, this kind of parallelism that exists, will continue, because that's kind of the bread and butter of Star Wars and mythology, and I think so. I think that gives me a little.
You have to imagine that. Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine JJ and even Kasdan. I think Kasdan comes off as a little bit more aloof, more than JJ. But you have to imagine that they're smart guys. They know what's going on. They say one thing in the media, but they know what's going on. You know what I mean? And
absolutely.
And so I mean, I don't. That's why I've always the argument's always been with me and Mike. It's like, is the story group dictating, or is it JJ telling, like, look, until I'm done with this movie, basically you have to kind of work around me. So I mean, that's always the case. I mean, where do you think that's at?
Right. I get the sense that there were probably some parameters that were laid down, and they kind of, I'm sure they had a certain amount of freedom, but I think they probably had to play within the lines, just based on what I've seen, because it seems awfully deliberate, awfully apparent that that's kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we know that JJ loves the original trilogy, which, and Mike, I know you probably, Rondo probably has another question there, but tying this in just real quick, and this will kind of be like, I think, probably really one of my last questions, unless you say something that it sparks some idea in my head. Sometimes, and I don't mean this in a negative way, Mike, at all, so just hear me out on this. When I see you on social media sometimes, and you're out there, you're doing your ring theory, you're obviously saying, hey, look at what I've come up with, and you're wanting to promote your site the same way we want to promote the Cantina Cast, and we want people to listen, and we want people to hear us out and give our ideas a listen, even if you don't agree with us. So I see you out there, and you say things. You don't say things. People, I think, are probably getting on you because they're prequel haters, and then you'll find, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like sometimes you find a flaw in the original trilogy, and then you kind of turn it back on them. It's like, well, the original trilogy is not, and me and Mike do this as well. I mean, we're realists. We can see where maybe something isn't the greatest thing ever since sliced bread. Like, I mean, we love Star Wars, we all do, and nobody's denying that. But I guess my real question is like where, just for fun, and maybe you see it all as one whole 12-hour movie and all this, like we've talked about before, but like where do you rank the movies? Like I really want to know, like is because I know, like I said, going back, you've pointed out like some of the flaws because people want to point out the flaws in the prequels. So you say you might make a point about the original trilogy, and I'm not going to go into any detail or any tweak because I just don't have one in front of me, but I know I've seen it before.
Sure.
So and I'm not getting on you or anything like that because we've all done it. So, but that's just the real question, just from a fan's perspective. And I think that your opinion, because you've written this, you're such a defender of the prequels. I think your opinion is just as important on the rankings of these movies as anybody. As silly and as fun as it is, we all have our lists and rankings. But if anybody's list counts, in my opinion, yours would be the one that would count right up there with anybody's. So, I mean, so where would you rank the movies? Like, what's your favorite?
Wow.
Like 1 through 6.
Wow. Well, I guess, about, I grew up watching the original trilogy, of course, and I loved those movies. As I got older, I kind of got more interested in filmmaking and kind of went in a different direction. And I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about why I'm putting some of that stuff out on Twitter. And when I got more into filmmaking and into like film criticism and, you talk to film scholars and even film professionals and like film professors, I learned pretty quickly that not everybody likes Star Wars, and it kind of, I remember, in the mid '90s, it just kind of blew my mind. Like, what do you mean you don't like Star Wars? What do you mean they're bad movies? And is there something wrong with you? And I realized, like, once you leave kind of that kind of fan community, when you get into that larger film community, the opinions on Star Wars were very, very different. And what I find this topic fascinating, and maybe I'll do something about it someday. But it became painfully obvious that there isn't really a criticism that I have heard about the prequels that was not also said against the original movies. And anybody who's willing to take the time to read original reviews, when A New Hope and Empire and Jedi were released, you'll see that. It's almost just verbatim, in terms of the acting and the dialogue. And, that they were just silly kids movies and they're soulless and they're not, there's no emotional grip. And I mean, you name it, it's just special effects and there's nothing there. And of course, when we were growing up, we didn't know this. And, had somebody told me, I wouldn't have even cared. So I always kind of had that perspective, when I was getting older, I kind of had that perspective, knowing that, there seemed like this, like, one group over here who, thinks they're the pinnacle of cinematic achievement, and you have this other group here who call them film snobs or whatever you want. They just don't take any of those movies seriously. And I remember, and this kind of, and not only did they not take them seriously, you may have heard stories about how, Star Wars, many people blamed for ruining movies, ruining the, these more sophisticated, mature adult pictures that were being made, from the late 60s to the late 70s and, the American New Wave. And this kind of, hatred for Star Wars kind of peaked in, I'm just kind of rambling here, so stop me if I'm going on, but...
Oh, no, it's good stuff, Mike. Go ahead. I'm interested in what you had to say here, so please go.
Oh, I was going to say, so, and this kind of hatred towards those movies really peaked, in the mid to late 90s. I mean, there was this terrible piece in Esquire, how Star Wars killed the movies, and there was a book by Peter Biskin called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. I mean, these movies were thought to just be, they're just soulless toy commercials that have ruined Hollywood. So, so it was interesting to watch The Phantom Menace having this kind of background, and this was playing in my mind at the same time. So 1999 comes, I watch The Phantom Menace, and I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it. I think it's a fantastic picture and just terribly underrated. But I remember, after a while, fans were starting to say things like, God, the acting is terrible, and the dialogue is terrible, and it's just like a kid's movie, and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh wow, you know, suddenly the same things were being said about the prequels that were being said about the original movies, only this time they were these criticisms were coming from inside the fan base. It was like friendly fire, and I still can't believe it. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I want to post. I used to post a lot more old reviews and just to try to give people some perspective. What's interesting is, we loved those movies as kids. We ignored all of those flaws that older, more sophisticated, more experienced, cinephiles, they just creamed those movies for. But when we grew up, and now more, and geek culture has now kind of taken over, and more people who grew up with those movies and love those movies are working in the media, and they're writing for these websites, and they're actual critics. Well, suddenly, it's like we hold these original movies up to this, on this pedestal, and so it just blows my mind that, that people can look at the prequels and complain about certain elements, but then not see those exact same things in the original movies. And I'm not saying, those things are bad or, they should be, I guess I'm not saying that we should harp on those and complain about those pieces, but, my point in a lot of this is that, like take the acting, for example. People, I know it's tough to come to terms with, but George Lucas got the exact performances that he wanted from his actors in all of those movies. And I think when people see those performances, they compare it to something else, in more of a modern movie. And they think, well, Lucas tried to achieve, that, and he couldn't, and therefore we're left with something bad. But, anybody who spends a little bit of time learning about Lucas and those movies, they'll find out nothing could be further from the truth. Lucas has said that he uses he wants his actors to perform using an older method, an older acting style that is pre-method, that was more prevalent in the movies of the 30s and the 40s.
Now, see, we might just interrupt you because we've said this before when we were talking about things that, the faster, more intense thing. The actors today just don't get that for some reason, and that's where this poor dialogue or the way it's presented on screen seems poor to audiences around the world. Like they see it as wooden or whatever it is, but and then you go, of course, with the Harrison Ford line. You can type this stuff, but you can't say it, George, or whatever, and stuff like that. But I'm just curious, is that where maybe people get that whole, like, they don't look at it the way we looked at it as kids now? Was that a fair assessment to what Joe and I were talking about, I don't know, 1,000 podcasts ago, where that style that he was trying to, I guess, preserve or bring to the forefront just didn't hold as well in the prequels, I guess is what I'm saying. Or even the original trilogies, because, I mean, one could make an argument about that with the dialogue, as you were saying.
Right. I mean, I think it's important to realize that the target audience was 12-year-old boys, and while the movies were certainly meant to be enjoyed by people of all ages, the primary audience was for young people. That never changed, and I think, again, I think that's really it's really supported by just reading a lot of old reviews. But I guess the point that I was trying to make with the acting, though, is people need to realize that he wanted these movies to play out like old movies, like movies from the 30s and the 40s, and so the acting was meant to support that. The dialogue was meant to support that. The way that they were shot is meant to support that. And so I think there's a difference between watching the movie and saying, well, that's bad, thinking that Lucas tried to do something else but couldn't because he doesn't have the talent or the skill, and watching that movie and realizing that what you're seeing is exactly what Lucas wanted, critics be damned, and asking the question, well, why is it like that? And just not liking it. So that's what a lot of it, for me, comes down to, is just Lucas got the movies that he wanted, it's just nobody likes a lot of the stylistic choices that he made because they don't want an old movie. They don't want a movie from the 30s and the 40s. They want a movie from 2015.
Absolutely true. Well, let me ask: does anyone ever know what George actually thinks of the Holy Saga? Has he ever, other than I know he's invested in it, obviously, but film-wise, as he's a student of film and stuff like that. I mean, has there been any documentation? Because I would assume the avant-garde that he was all into and stuff like that. Mike, if he sat down as a film student or a film professor, how would he judge his own films? I guess I don't know. I mean, have you ever even thought of that?
Yeah, I don't know.
I know it's an oddball question, but I was just curious offhand. But,
I mean, I know when people asked him how he, especially after the prequels, how does it feel, to be done with them, and do you like them and the way that they turned out? And he was always very, I don't know if it was just obviously he has to say that, but he would say that he enjoyed the process this time. And I think he was very pleased with the results and got almost everything that he wanted, and he thought that the films accomplished everything that they were meant to. But I'd love to hear him teach a course on his own pictures. That would be
well, we got to get
a hell of an idea.
Well, he's retired. He's got to find something to do other than go to Disneyland with his daughter. We got to find something for him to do.
Well, he does have a museum he might have to work on.
Well, that too. Yeah. Well, maybe he could teach a class at the museum. I mean, just saying, George. But well, quickly. Yeah, exactly. He should be doing the tour. He probably would because he pops up out of random places now. That
would be hilarious. Yeah,
that'd be cool. Like he'd be the tour guide. Have a little hat.
Let me throw this out there. With the reviews and everything you were talking about, Mike, when you're going back and how everything, it almost sounds like the reviews almost match up the same way the movies do. The reviews are almost their own version of ring composition.
I was wondering if anyone was going to pick up on that. I mean, that little experiment I did with compiling all old reviews from Rotten Tomatoes, and it's interesting how.
And didn't the prequels go out ahead? Like I think in the end.
Yeah, believe it or not, with hundreds of old reviews, overall the prequel trilogy scored a higher tomato rating than the original trilogy did. Yeah.
Well, and it just made me think this as you were sitting there speaking about that and all that. All I could do was hear a quote from the movie. I heard Darth Vader saying, "The circle is now complete." So there we go. Right. I mean, I don't think there's a better way to sum up this whole conversation.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. But just quickly, Mike, before we go, what was your favorite Star Wars movie? I'm put you on the spot here. I don't mean to do that, but if you had to pick one.
My sentimental choice will always be Star Wars. I mean, growing up watching that, watching that on HBO, I remember just, with my X-Wing fighter and making my own trench run between the couch and the coffee table. I mean, that's my sentimental choice. But other than that, I'm always over the place. I mean, some days I love, one movie over another, but I do love to give out the Attack of the Clones love because that movie does not get enough love. I think it's criminally underrated, underappreciated. I think it's a real visual masterpiece, and I think it's definitely worth.
You want to
look.
talk about people complaining about bad acting? In that hut, when he kills the Sand People and he goes back and he tells Padme about it, like people are like, "That's bad acting." It's like, hell, I acted like that last Saturday night. I mean, are you kidding me? Like I couldn't have pulled off a better performance, acting like a fool when I get mad about something.
Actually, I think Hayden Christensen did it better than you, but
I know he did. That's what I'm saying. And mine was real. Mine came from a real disturbed place.
But you didn't kill any women and children, did you?
No. I do not do that. I do not get physical. I do not get I say things I don't mean sometimes. And I get loud and boisterous, but other than that, I do not lay. I've never been in a fight in my life, and
that would be me. I'm the guy that fights.
Fist fight in my life. I've never been in a fist fight. Verbal fight, of course, everybody has, but fist fight, I'd like to keep it. I'm 33 years old. I'd like to keep it that way. So anyway,
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I have to say before we go, Mike, I'm kind of with you on picking your. My favorite is, of course, The Empire Strikes Back. But to me, as a kid, because Return of the Jedi is the first one I saw in the theater, so that's like my sentimental choice. But not so much because of I have to say I think it's the dialogue and the fight between Luke and Vader and what happens there on the Death Star that meant so much to me. I don't know. It's some of the best scenes I think are in Return of the Jedi. That's all. I'll leave it at that. And yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Return of the Jedi, love it, absolutely love it. I still, that's the only one I have childhood memories of seeing in the theater. I'm pretty sure I saw Empire, but I mean, that's what my parents say, but I just don't have very many. I can't picture seeing that, but Jedi, absolutely.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
The great thing about Star Wars, and that's why we do it, both mics, is because, we can all have, whether, there's people out there that have the bad opinions, and we've talked about them some tonight, and there's people like us that are just gonna, it's a Star Wars movie, we're gonna find a way to love it, one way or another, however we rationalize it, whether it's very detail oriented like Mike has done, and how we've done over these, over 100, and I guess this will be 105, 106 podcasts, whatever we release this one as. So that's the great thing about Star Wars. We always say it. I think we say it like almost every podcast. It's just great. It's just great to be a Star Wars fan, and I'd hate to be one of those film snobs that Mike was talking about earlier in the episode, who just thinks that these are horrible movies. And I mean, if that's the kind of cynicism that some people have, like, I don't want any part of it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well said.
Well, I'm a podcast snob, but I'll leave it at that. But thank you, Mike, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully you come back on, and hopefully maybe we should get Mike on a character dissection at some point, Joe, because he probably brings a different, obviously a more mature perspective, I'd have to say, or a professional perspective than what you and I do normally.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, well, Mike, you're welcome to come on anytime, especially
Absolutely.
The Force Awakens, and we can come and we can dissect that as well 400 times like we're going to. And stuff like that, but it's been a pleasure for you to be on the show, and we thank you greatly. Just give quickly whatever you want to shout out, plug, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I'd love to talk with everyone. Just give me a shout out on Twitter at Mike Klimo. You can friend me on Facebook. Just let me know what you think of the essay, and I'd love to hear any parallels that you found. Let's chat.
All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll catch you later.